Hello everyone, so in this tutorial we are going to be having a look at creating a modular tree for computer games. For this tutorial you will need a copy of 3ds Max, Substance Painter and Photoshop. So ultimately we are aiming to create big trees that populate a forest or a heavy populated area in the most efficient way as possible. What we don't want is something that is unique like this. It can't really be repeated or manipulated very easily. As you can see, it will also take up a lot of texture space, and it can really only be used once. It looks good, but it's not what we are looking at in this tutorial. Instead, what we're looking at are trees that can be modularized, okay? It's trees that can be manipulated very easily using minimal texture resources. If we have a look at my UV area here, we can see that I've actually taken up very, very little of the UV space. A lot of these leaves, trunks and branches can all be repeated but still made to look slightly different. So, what types of trees populate dense forests? Typically, they are pine trees like this. So let's examine this quickly. As we can see, the trunk is very straight. It has minimal deviations or bends. When the branches do come out of the trunk, they are quite abrupt and they tend not to transition very smoothly. Finally, the leaves that are there are incredibly dense, so you can't really see anything behind it, like branches, twigs. You can actually barely see the trunk here either. Okay, so all of this information is actually going to help us model the tree in the most efficient way possible. Okay, so we're in our 3ds Max scene. We're going to go create primitive object. We're going to select the primitive object cylinder. I'm going to click and drag that out in the top viewport there. I'm now going to maximize the perspective viewport, and I'm going to turn on wireframe by pressing F4. Now, if you have a look in your parameters, you will notice that I'm working in meters. It's always a good idea to check your unit setup. Go to customize unit setup, make sure that the display unit scale is in meters and that the system unit's scale is also in meters. You should always be checking that whenever you're modeling. Okay, so the radius of the tree, the radius is half the diameter, half the width of this cylinder. Now, if I want a tree to be 1 meter wide, I want the radius to be half a meter. As you can see, that looks quite small, but it all depends on the size of the grid. I want the height to be around 20 meters. So we've got a 20-meter tree here. Okay. Now I'm actually thinking that's going to be a bit tall. I'm going to go for a 15-meter tree, actually. I'm going to set the size to 12 and the amount of height segments, I'm going to set that at 15. Okay, so we've got a good amount of segments there to work with. Now, this is obviously going to be the trunk of the tree. I'm going to right click and convert this object to an editable poly. I'm going to remove the top and bottom polygons. I'm going to make sure the object is centered just by right clicking on the move icon and right clicking on the X and Y. Make sure they're at 0. Under vertex, I'm going to go down to soft selection. I'm going to select the top vertices of the cylinder and I'm going to set my fall off to 15 meters. Using the scale tool, I'm going to just drag in those top vertices. So as you can see, we've got a gradual taper towards the top of the tree. I'm going to set the fall off to 10, just drag it in a bit more. And now I'm going to set it to 5, drag it in a bit more again. And eventually turn off soft selection and keep dragging until these top vertices are completely intertwined. I'm going to weld these top vertices together. Just make sure that my threshold is nice and high there. I'm going to set it to around 1. And I'm just going to click and drag and make sure that none of these vertices are separate. They should all be 1 now. Okay, so this is effectively our trunk complete for the time being. What we now want to do is to unwrap it. So I'm going to go to the Modify panel. I'm going to select all the polygons of the model, and I'm going to do a quick planar projection just to clear all of the unwanted seams. I'm going to turn off planar, and I'm going to go down to the point-to-point seams. So I'm going to go to one side of my model, draw a seam all the way up the trunk, right to the top. There we go. Just right click to deselect. I'm now going to go over to pelt, and I'm going to just hit start pelt, stop pelt, and relax. Now you'll notice that the top of the tree is a bit bunched up here. It doesn't matter, just commit to it. It doesn't matter, just commit to it. And then what you want to do is to go to Tools, Relax, and just add a little bit of stretch. And as you can see, that's evened out the UVs very nicely. It's always a good idea to put the checker pattern onto your model. This way you can check how evenly the texture will be distributed. And I'm just going to position this UV to the left corner of my texture space. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to collapse the unwrap UVW modifier. I'm going to press yes, and I'm going to go to File, Export Selected, Object, and I'm going to export it as an object file. Okay, so we're now moving on to creating the bark texture for the tree. So it's advisable that you don't just copy and paste images off Google. Go out there and take your own photos of trees. There's plenty of them in the world, so go out there and take your own, and then you don't have to worry about plagiarism. It's 100% yours. Okay, so I've got a square bark texture open up in Photoshop. I just cropped it down so that it's a square resolution. Now I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go down to Other and select Offset. I'm just going to offset this by 400 pixels in each direction. So ultimately what I'm looking for here is where there is a really nasty seam. I want to make sure that this texture is at least somewhat tileable. It doesn't have to be completely tileable for what we're about to do, but we can't have a big sharp seams like this, so we need to get rid of them. So I'm going to get rid of them by using the clone and stamp tool. So I'm just going to select that. Hotkey for that is S. And I'm just going to go to a part of the texture that I would like to copy. I'm going to hold down Alt and click. I'm then going to release Alt and then click and press in an area where I want to cover over. And as you can see, it has sampled that part of the image onto the area that I am now clicking on. So this really is a tool where it benefits you to just get in there and try it out, just experiment. Don't expect the best results straight away. You're going to have to get used to doing these kinds of things several times over until you become efficient. Okay, so once you're happy with the result of this texture, you want to go back to offset. I'm going to go minus 400 in each direction. So that puts the image back in its original position. I'm then going to save that out as a PNG, and we're ready to go into Substance Painter.